Okay, so last time, we talked about Platonic forms. Is my voice audible to all? I think there are very few only, so we
You
can.
are audible.
Okay, so I've enabled the option for unmuting yourselves. So since we have very few only, so you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask in between also, no problem. Okay, so let us start. So last time we discussed about Platonic forms and Plato's cave. So just like we see there are many kinds of dogs around us. So if you want to describe all these things, so I will be talking in terms of abstract concept dog. So the dog as an abstract concept or universal, these are all individuals, maybe a Doberman or maybe German Shepherd or what kind of different dogs we have. So, so behind the discussion of all the different transient observations that we have in this world, the phenomenal experiences that we have in this world. So, so there is a universal. If you can think of a universal that actually and that actually instantiates in different forms, different objects that we see around us. So in science, what we do, we actually formulate laws, we make models, and our scientific formulations, theories, they actually give a working principle of those abstract objects. So just like if I want to describe this dogs or the space around them. So I'll make a scientific model of that. That would be kind of one-to-one correspondence. At least I would be assuming that there is a one-to-one correspondence with that kind of abstract object, dog. Or suppose I'm a physicist and I'm working on some theory. So the ingredients of the theory, the fundamental assumptions of the theory would be kind of in the hindsight would be assuming that they are actually very faithfully representing the reality that is actually there. So behind all the observations, that behind all transient observations, so the basic concept. So so it is modeling faithful. So that's a assumption. So when I change my assumption, suppose my observation doesn't fit into the theory I have, then I go back and change my assumptions, and then make I try to make a further better correspondence with the universal. So that is how scientific knowledge progresses. And I also talked about the Platonic cave, the Plato's cave example, how actually different prisoners are tied up and they are only bound to see a certain nature of reality, the shadows actually. And the person who goes to the sun and he is actually seeing the real world. So this is Plato's cave, and Plato actually is a unique contribution of Plato, that the notion of this phenomenal world and noumenal world. So basically, there is a fundamental reality beyond what I perceive in my through my senses of all these phenomenal objects. So there is a fundamental thing that is not changing. So that he called form and universal. And similarly, like that, one can actually, since science talks only of matter, there is no other reality beyond matter. So all our causal structures, they actually stop in matter only and related framework. So that is the nature of study that we do in current days. So, but nevertheless, if we extrapolate that the universals could be from the metaphysical world also, if at all. First of all, I do not know whether it is there or not. So, assuming that it is there, just like Plato talked about, since everything is changing in this world, they cannot be the fundamental reality. So the fundamental reality, it has to lie somewhere that is not changing actually. So so that was Plato's idea. So anyway, we discuss all these things just to brush up. So so now let us start formally from here. So I talked about the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. So the phenomenal world is a transient world, And in Plato's language, they are all shadows, or you can think of as individual copies of the universal set, universal idea. And the noumenal world, that is the space of all perfection or universal. Just like when we talk of different kind of dogs, in our mind there are different different kinds of dogs are there, but dog as a concept, as a universal, it is there in the noumenal world. So this is actually the noumenal and phenomenal. This is a terminology from a medieval philosopher, the Western philosophy. So is Immanuel Kant. So his ideas were very interesting in the sense that he gave a concept of thing in themselves. So here, the when you observe any reality outside us, so what Kant said, Immanuel Kant said. So he said, uh, external world is actually thing in it itself. That means what? That means the objects that we see in space and time, they're just appearances. They're not factual things. They're appearances, not object that exist independently of our intuition. That means there is something noumenal, perhaps you understand. If not, you can just Google. Noumenal means that is not really transitory or not phenomenal, that is not changing, kind of some similar connotation it has. So beyond appearances that we see in this world, in our space and time, so there are objects that are existing independently of our intuitions. So he called it thing in themselves. What the implication of this concept thing in themselves is that we can only cognize about the objects in the space and time, and we can never know about the objects themselves. So because what the object is actually, if you talk as I mean the ontological states, what it is, I really cannot understand what it is. So unless I understand what is the ontological state of that, so to find a causal structure, a complete causal structure, for me it is I don't see a connection. So that's why Kant also himself recognized this fact that if I don't have access to those the causal structure in the noumenal world, so that means noumenal world is of not much importance to us. It's never accessible to us. The only reality is, I mean, the whatever they may be the reality, and the appearances that we are seeing may be the shadows. But what is the actual reality? I can never describe. So that this version is called transcendental idealism. Idealism means there is no really varieties, just one kind of thing. So there are similar counterparts that existed in Vedic culture also. They are called Advaitans, Advait philosophy. So where they talk about there is just one fundamental reality, nothing else. The appearances that we see around us, so they are all illusion only, and they don't have factual existence. Or that we'll discuss subsequently when we go into that discussion. So, and the important thing to note is that uh, so the external objects. For a moment, let us assume that, and of course, throughout discussion, we are assuming this, that are this universal and individual and concepts. So the fruit may be a universal set, and then the apple, grapes, banana may be different subsets of that, or you can just think of instances of that. And in the apple also there are different categories of apple: red, green, and whatever, different taste, flavor. Grapes also, bananas also, different kinds of bananas. So then they have different attributes: color, texture, taste. I mean, everything that you can ascribe to them. But then you figure out there are other objects also. They carry similar kind of attributes, just like the basket in which the fruits are kept. So it has certain texture, certain color. Again, the color, texture, all these things, these universals are also having commonality with the fruits that I'm describing. So if you analyze in this way the whole phenomenal world, so we'll see that that so these causal structures are intertwined. I mean, it's a very complicated structure, and we can hardly figure out what is really there outside. I mean, the causal way of to figure out. So to simplify the whole thing, so science and science as science progressed, so we thought that we need to be objective, and we restricted our domain, that we will be only talking about matter, and that too that is verified by observations. Certain things that are not really verified through our observations, so we hardly give any credence to that. Uh, So the causal structures and the limitations of language, they are very intimately connected. So the usual notion we carry always, that suppose A is equal to B, so then certainly A is not equal to B. Both the statements cannot be true at the same time. So because they are just opposites. So that's why, so in the formal logic or in the formal arguments that we make, even in language or even in our theory makings or even in computer languages as well. So suppose I don't meet a condition, then that the statement associated with that is not true. So but uh, if the condition satisfies, then the statement associated with that is true. So both the things, just like this Venn diagram, or what do you call this? The flow charts, the flow chart. So the two loops, the two paths, they're not the same. So suppose this condition is satisfied, this is true. If it is not, then that is true. I mean, if that condition is satisfied, then that is true. So both the things cannot be true at the same time. So that is a limitation of our all kinds of expression of the reality that we can ever make in whatever form. So so let us actually see what actually our ancient text, ancient scriptures, they talk about the nature of reality that we have. So the real form of the tree, it cannot be perceived in this world. So Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, 3rd verse, it actually talks about that there are, I mean, this universe, the phenomenal experiences we have in this world, happiness, distress, all kinds of relations we have in this world, and then whatever objects we have in this world, so they really cannot be properly understood. So it's compared to a shadow, actually, just like in the Platonic language. So it is compared to a shadow. And the real form of this tree cannot really be perceived in this world. And no one understands where it ends, where it begins, and where the foundation is. Because the causal structure is so complicated, so involving physical, metaphysical realities. So to figure out where the beginning, where the end, how it is connected, so why somebody is suffering, why somebody is enjoying, so all these fine details, it's very difficult to figure out. So that's why, so Bhagavad Gita says the real form of tree cannot be perceived. If somebody tries to figure out, I'll, with all my intelligence and the intelligence of all the people in this world, I will exactly decipher the nature of the world. It's not going to happen. So of course what it says is that the information that fundamentally it conveys, that this world is a perverted reflection of the universal, that is in the transcendental world. So let us make this extrapolation with of course this is not a scientific statement when I talk in terms of metaphysical realities. So for the moment, let us assume, and I hope many of you have read the scriptures, so or at least just heard about them. So if you assume the realities of metaphysical realities, so as our ancient texts say, so that this world is actually a reflection, a shadow of the original world. So where there are similar varieties, similar experiences, but in their pure form. So, so that is the nature of this world. So now, let me ask a question: is there a single root of all cause and effect relations? So, what do you think? So, or there are multiple roots of the cause and effect relations? What I mean by cause and effect relations is that, suppose I'm talking to you, so you are receiving my voice, and So you will dig up. So how this voice is coming to you. So what you will do? So you will basically look into the program, the Zoom software that you're using, how it is processing the data, and like that you will trace back to the cause from the effects. So similarly, that is actually the approach that we do, at least in the scientific research, that we want to trace the cause from the effects. So now the question is, so can I really end up in a single route, or there may be multiple routes, or there are no routes at all? Can these possibilities be true? So what do you think? So there are some chats. Yes, please. So hope the participants they are hearing. So you can just reply from the chat that so the three options that I gave. So there are just one single root of all cause and effect relations. There is no root, and there are multiple roots. So what do you think? Yeah, Ipsida is saying Mahatattva, one root. Yes. Any other answer? Can there be no roots at all? There are certain very well known philosophers, they actually talk about no roots. And of course, there are philosophers who actually talk about multiple roots. And of course, that go back to form one root. That is the discussion of today that we'll be having. Okay, let us proceed. So, so then the then the question is, can you really trace back to the root of all cause and effect relations through the analysis of this world? Can we really trace back to that? So there are some more answers. Okay, so Sitendra is saying that everything is possible without further information. Yes, everything is possible. That is true. All the possibilities that there. So let us discuss some of those possibilities. Just a minute. There is some. Okay, so I need to change the host. So if I change the host, then I'll lose the sharing of screen. I think you're already the co-host. No problem. So let us continue like that. Okay, so can you trace back to the root of all cause and effect? That is not so clear. So before we proceed to the Advaita doctrine, when non-dual root is talked about, and Dvaita doctrine, where dual roots are talked about, of course, that is also one. So there is a way to reconcile. So, but I'll pause here just to discuss that there are no roots philosophy also. So just like Buddhist philosophers, so that they see that the transient experiences we have in this world, the phenomenal experiences of this world, so they are actually problematic. So like nobody wants to suffer, but so there is a great suffering in this world. There is all kinds of problems in this world. There are kind of I mean different things that we don't want. So the experience of suffering from the manifestation of different kind of forms we have in this world. So the philosophers like the Buddhist philosophers, they want to negate. I mean, that is no question of any kind of form or any kind of nominal space, nominal reality that is there. So what do they say? So they say that all these experiences are false. So ultimately, there is nothing. So nothing came from nothing. Everything came up, and so that is their philosophy. But then it has the problem that if there is nothing is there, so then how come something could pop up from there? I mean, of course, this is also one of the most fundamental question in even in science, also philosophy, also. So that how something can come from nothing. So, or why there is something rather than nothing. So that is a question. So if there is nothing in the as a fundamental blueprint, so how can there be varieties of this world? So here I'll not go into the doctrine of Buddhism, so or the related philosophy. So the focus that I want to make here is the non-dual and dual roots of universals. So if we go back to Vedic philosophy, even in modern science or Western philosophy as well, so these two varieties can always be seen. So the default position of this world, default position of thinkers is that we think that since there is problem in this world, so if you go back to the root of the universal, so it should be of non-dual. So so Advaita understanding is that there is just one variety. So in science also we do a similar kind of thing. So science prefers to work with primary properties behind phenomenal experiences, just like I have a heat as an experience. So I'll talk when I'll talk in terms of so when I will talk in terms of temperature or the entropy or those related properties, so that becomes primary property, and I describe phenomenal experiences objectively. But that is very good, actually. That's a great asset of boon of modern science, that we learned how to describe things objectively through primary properties. But the only problem is that it restricts itself to the domain of matter. That is also sometimes called physicalism. That I will only talk about physical world that I can sense through my eyes, perceive through my ears, or touch or see. So all these things are only matter only. I see nothing else apart from that. So science very comfortably sits itself in the domain of matter. So that is the physicalism, and this is also one kind of non-dualism, but that is restricted to matter. Or you can say scientific materialism sometimes. So scientism sometimes. So when we are not ready to accept that there may be a bigger scope of reality that is outside of this phenomenal experience. So the question is, can I really get hold of the nominal world? So just like Aristotle, as we discussed previously, that he was thinking that the forms, actually the universals, they actually reside in this world. That's why the soul or Atma, whatever we know in this Vedic world. So Plato believed that the world, the eternal world is there outside. So, but Aristotle believed that it is here. So science actually sprang from the works of Aristotle, followed by medieval philosophers, and then scientific revolution, industrial revolution. So, but then, so that in our Vedic tradition also, so there are philosophers who profess that there is just one non-dual attribute of the root of the universals. So that is also called Brahman sometimes, the greatest. So the Upanishads that talk about the logical aspects, the basically metaphysical aspects of the truth, and the Vedas in themselves, they talk more of rituals, of praising the demigods and getting boons in return. But then in the philosophical side, when it comes, the Upanishads are considered the philosophical side of the Vedas, and then they are summarized in in a concise form in a Vedanta Sutra. And of course, Bhagavad Gita is also is a literature of similar kind. So the Vedantic tradition literature. So let me have a quote from a Upanishad. So there it's from Kena Upanishad. Kena Upanishad. So that is questioning actually. So what it says that the eye doesn't go there, nor does speech go there, nor the mind. We know it not. We don't understand how anyone might teach us about it. It is different from the known, even more different from the unknown. Thus, we have heard from the teachers in the ancient tradition who explained this to us. So here, a seeker is explaining his problem in finding the root of the universals, who is the primary root of all the experiences we have in this world. So what he's saying, that mind cannot reach, speech cannot go there. So how do I describe that? So that's why what scriptures take the path. So they take the path of qualitative language. Qualitative language means that I'll be using the analogies, similes, metaphors, all kinds of such things, and I really cannot make a quantitative estimate. Of course, in Vedic literature there are quantitative things, but they are not. I mean, the way it is described, it is to be cast into quantity terms, or as we know in modern science. Modern science is totally objective, and it's independent of anybody's perception. It has to exist. So just like Kant also believed that the things are in themselves. So modern science actually makes an attempt to model those things in themselves faithfully. So at least it assumes that it faithfully models the things in themselves. But so when the things are extrapolated to the metaphysical realm, so then the objective language is not sufficient actually. So because the nature of description there, because just like if I talk in terms of a naive language, very that suppose there are two students, one is from nursery, or just learning, a kid who is just learning to write numbers and make multiplications, additions, and there is a person who is doing his PhD in mathematics. So the understanding between these two people would be very different. So it's like the Vedantic tradition or the Vedic tradition. The reality is that it talks about, it's more of experience, experiencing the reality face to face. So that's why it refers to make a qualitative language, and it emphasizes on practice, the spiritual practices. So suppose a child who is just learning to do mathematics. So he comes to a PhD classroom, or the lab of a PhD student, or the sees a notebook of a researcher. So he will not figure out what is written. So he may say that this is all wrong because it doesn't fit into its own own picture. So that doesn't mean that there is no reality beyond that. How can I deny that? So that is a humbler stand in which a Vedic seeker approaches the scriptures and Vedic reality when he sees the qualitative language. We know that even quantitative language or qualitative language, both fall short of describing the reality. So, language has a very typical feature, that language involves a subject and predicate. So what is subject and predicate? So just like this is an apple, apple is red. So there is a subject this for apple, and there is a a term that actually describes what is this, or what is this apple. So that is actually predicate. So any kind of thinking that we have in this world that involves a subject and a predicate. It may be a computer language, it may be our mathematical equations. So although in our mathematics we really do not acknowledge the nature of subject and predicate, so the qualifiers of the noun, just like last time I was giving the example of pipe. Pipe as a concept may be used as a something as a set of five objects, or those set could be very different. Maybe five baskets of fruits, or maybe five paints, or five palettes of color, or maybe what not, all kinds of things that I count. So the nature of subject and predicate, that always there in our thinking, whether we acknowledge or don't acknowledge. So it's always there. So that means the language itself is dualistic. Do you follow this statement that that the language is always dualistic? Okay, so I assume that you. But then, So, and of course, the thinking and language are not really separable. They are always inseparable. So while I'm thinking, I'm actually using a mental language to describe things. So even if somebody doesn't know a language, doesn't even single language, so still he has a certain way to do. There should be some subject and there should be some object. So subject and predicate always they are always combined. So that means suppose there is just one kind of root of universals. I mean, that is just one variety of the truth. That means the nature of language is such that it is dualistic. That means a dualistic description cannot accommodate a non-dual substance, non-dual object. So I hope you appreciate that. So suppose I assume that there is the conception of Brahman as the only reality. There is nothing else apart from that. So, but how do I describe that? My language is dualistic. So anything I said Brahman is, even if I say Brahman is indescribable, so that means I'm using a property of Brahman. That Brahman is this, and there is something which is quality of Brahman. So the subject and the predicate they are together. So they are not separate. So that means I'm introducing a dual world. But what the Advait philosophers talk, so that there is no reality apart from Brahman. So, okay, we'll shortly go to that. So that's why, so because of the limitation of the language that we use in our day-to-day life or in whatever form, so it has its limitations. So that's why, so when scriptures talk about a qualitative language, so in the Nyaya, there is example of Sakha Chandra Nyaya. So basically, Sakha means the branches, Chandra means the moon. So suppose I want to point out where is moon. Uh, I would say that the moon is in the dark night. So today is Purnima. So in the Purnima night, so you'll see the bright moon. Suppose you see behind the branches of a tree. So so to point out what is moon, I would point out that here is the moon that is behind the branches. But is it true that the moon is really behind the branches? Does the moon really require the branches to qualify it? No, it's not actually. It's my limitation. So that's why sometimes people make the opinion that the language of the scriptures, the qualitative language, they're only pointing. They're not really saying anything. They're just pointing. So, but there is a problem in this conclusion. So, just like many people who are not so comfortable with accepting the Vedic reality or the reality of the scriptures or metaphysical reality, so they would say that the scriptures they actually talk about the world that is not really there. It's mythology, fantasy, and the scriptures are just indicating something. So, but may not be true. But here, as we see, so so even the very conception of some object, if anything just comes to my mind, so that means there is a reality added to that. So I hope you appreciate this statement. So suppose I think of a unicorn, or maybe a very hypothetical object that doesn't exist in this world. Just think of flying mountains, or maybe a golden mountain, or maybe or any kind of thing you can cook up in your mind. Just because it is existing in our mind, that means there is some tinge of reality to that. So it cannot be totally false. I mean, it may not be the way that I'm thinking, but the thing that I'm having in my mind, because my mind is as per the Vedic paradigm, mind is the reality. Mind is not a something that is not factually there. And Vedic paradigm talks about mind as a fundamental object matter that is in between the most perfect world, the spirit, and the most roughest of the shadows, the gross objects. Mind forms the subtle matter that is there in the Vedic paradigm. So, So that's why anything that I think of, it has some reality added to that. So that's why even though the qualitative language of the scriptures are pointing me, but here is a caution that I cannot really say that it doesn't exist. It may be, it's pointing, it's true, but there may be reality, and in fact there should be a reality, because anything that can be conceived, that means there is some reality added to that. So this is something very fundamental, and as we progress in mind science, perhaps these things will be more clear to our modern nomenclature and understanding. So let us start with directly with the Vedantic paradigm, the debate between Advaita and Dvaita, the dualistic tradition and the non-dualistic tradition. So why we want to do that? Because we want to figure out. So as I traverse through my cause and effect relationships, so where is the end actually? So sometimes one of my friends, he actually shared me an article, so that talks about that we scientists are trying to modify the usual notion of causality. Maybe there is a framework where things are not causal, but that itself actually violates the whole framework of knowledge. So if anything is factual in this world, that means it should be connected with the causal structure. So because if suppose there is no causal structure in this world, that means anything can pop up at any point. I mean, so there is no meaning left to reality, the nature of reality. So causal structure is so fundamental to our very existence. It cannot be really denied. Maybe there are different ways to look at the causal structure. So just like that's why the debate between this Advaita and Dvaita philosophy is very important. So as I traverse through the cause and effect relationships, so Sankhya says that the cause is actually embodied in the effect. How is that? So in the assembly hall of a laptop, the machine manufactures a laptop, many laptops. So the cause is that machine, the big machine assembler, and that manufactures many laptops. So how is that machine is actually is inside the laptop? How is that possible? So that is possible because if we accept the concept of universals and individuals. So the universals, that's just a blueprint. That is a subtler state of the individual object that I am having. So, so that means that the idea of dog, it's there in the Doberman, it's there in the German Shepherd, and all kinds of dogs that I know. So, so actually, the cause is embodied inside the effect. So that's why. So this is a very fundamental thing. So that cause is embodied in the effect, and so here starts the starting point of Vedantic tradition. So let us discuss this. It's from Chandogya Upanishad 6.2.1. So in the beginning, this world was simply what is existent, and Sat, one only, without a second, and it thought to itself, let me become many, let me propagate myself. So the points that I want to bring your attention to. So in the beginning, that means there is a t equal to 0. There is a point where the whole world started. It's not that the world cannot have a origin. It's eternal, just like Aristotle thought, or some Vedic philosophers, or some philosophers think also like that. So this world is eternal. So it's not like that. So there is a beginning, and that means if there is a beginning, since I have a finite amount, I mean, I have a calculation of time. That means I can end also that time. So that would be end as well. That can be end as well. So so then it says the existent, the original root of the all universal is one only, without a second. And it thought it to itself. So who can think? So here is a caution. Who can think? Unless there is a form associated to that, a personality associated to that, so how can it think? So then it's thought that let me become many. So this is a starting point of both Advaita and Advaita traditions. So the Advaita traditions understand that there is one fundamental reality, that is Brahman, and the phenomenal world that we have in this in our experience, they are actually the transformation of that one fundamental reality, because there is nothing else apart from that, and that is the reality that is having without any attribute, no attributes of Brahman, nothing, no qualities of Brahman. So that is the original blueprint that they talk about. And then the question is, how can that original identity become many? Many means many truths. So that to answer that, so they say that there are certain portions of Brahman, so that was under illusions. So just like we'll talk the pots in the sky. I mean the sky, the pot, there is sky inside the pot and there is sky outside the pot also. So and the shape of the pot is actually separating the sky inside the pot and sky outside. So, so similarly, there was some transformation in the original reality, and because of that, there was many. But the Dvaitas don't agree with that. So what the Dvaitas say, so they say that actually the original identity is with all attributes. So even though that is one, but inherently there are multiple qualities as well, and that's the most perfect. Because if there is something lacking in the perfect, then how it can create the blueprints? I mean, further creation. So, so the Brahman is basically a word in Sanskrit that means the greatest. And in Advaita understanding, there is just one truth, Brahman. There is no attributes to Brahman, and Brahman is immutable. That means there is no nothing change that can be brought into the nature of Brahman. So, since earlier we discussed that language and thinking, so they are inherently dualistic. That means language cannot describe Brahman. So that means our scriptures are expression of languages only. So that means all our scriptures, they're all useless. So that is a natural consequence of Advaita understanding, that the scriptures are of no meaning, any kinds of form. That is not the fundamental reality. This world is an illusion, and so that means there is no meaning left apart from the Brahman, which has no qualities. So that means the happiness and pleasure, pain that I experience in this world, they really do not factually exist in a proper sense. But since I experience, maybe there is some fundamental reality to that, and they're really unsettled about this understanding. What is this transformation? And that is what is called Maya. So in the Advaita understanding, the understanding of Maya is that it is both real and unreal. I don't know. They don't know actually. And a language is my expression of Maya. The deities are expression of Maya. The like in our tradition we talk about the incarnation of God. That is also Maya. So everything is actually Maya. So without having any factual existence. So that is a great problem. So many times that actually makes us in some sense ungrateful of what we have received in this life. That ultimately the master, the maybe somebody who is in the spiritual path want to learn the spiritual life, the intricacies of that. For them, the scriptures doesn't carry any much meaning, because they may point us to the ultimate reality, but factually they don't carry any meaning for such kind of philosophers. So the master from whom we learn, so ultimately they also carry no meaning. Ultimately, they don't exist factually. So that means this reality is kind of make us little ungrateful. So that is a sad part of it. And since language is, I mean, the Brahman is intuitive, they say, and there is no reason thought that can access to that. So I mean, we just come across the reality all of a sudden. All of a sudden, the curtain of Maya is removed, and we experience the reality all of a sudden. And there is no attribute, nothing. So that is the fundamental understanding of Advait, but Brahman. So that doesn't mean that when I say that there is problem with Advait understanding, So that doesn't mean that the conception of Brahman is wrong. So as we'll see. So then actually the question of varieties, how does this variety originate in this world? As I just mentioned, so just like the pot and it's separated by the boundary of the pot, there are multiple realities created from the transformation. So similarly, Brahman and there is Maya. So what Dvaitans agree about is the Brahman, the greatest, and attributeless, formless, everything that you talk about. So, but then the question of Maya or the energy of Brahman, or sorry, Advaitans don't talk about the energy of Brahman. So they say that the Brahman was underwent transformation and they called Vivarta. That's why their philosophy is also called Vivartavada. So it underwent transformation and then that is Maya. So what is Maya? They really cannot answer, or we don't understand actually what is Maya, because it is factual also, not factual also. I mean, it's indescribable. In the language of those philosophers, it is anirvachaniya, indescribable. So here actually the understanding of Maya actually is a point where actually different kinds of philosophers they differ, both the Dvaitans and Advaitans or the Buddhists, the who say that there is no reality. So, so then I already mentioned this understanding of what is called ghatakas, patakas. So just like ghata means the pots, and the sky inside that the pot and the sky outside the pot, they are the same. And when the boundary of the wall of the pot that is broken, that means when ignorance is removed, avidya is removed. So that means one suddenly comes to realize the nature of reality, the greatest universal. So, but then the problem is, how does that happen? How does Brahman, who is without any attribute, without any qualities, without any transformation, underwent transformation, and that is how actually the understanding of Maya is not so well defined in Advaita philosophy, and we really do not understand how actually different jivas they manifest, and so what the Dvaitans answer is that the quality of air inside the pots, the pot and the air that's outside qualitatively is similar, and so that way there is oneness, but still they maintain their individuality, and something just like something merging with something, that means they are individuals. So their role, because the Brahman that we know, that is without attributes. So here is a famous analogy that is sometimes given to explain the nature of Maya, or how this world is an illusion. So it's a snake and rope analogy. So just remember that the analogies serve a purpose. So they are not something that proves a statement. They are kind of giving us an example how this is a possibility and to be taken seriously. So, so they really do not prove, they point actually. So snakes, suppose in a night we open our door and there is a coiled up rope outside our door, and we step onto that, and then we scream suddenly that there is a snake. Then we shut our door and come back to our room. And the next morning, when you open up our door in the bright sunlight, we see that that is not actually a snake. That is a rope. So this analogy is given by both Dvaitans and Advaitans to explain the nature of Maya. So what it says is that that just like see this rope is compared to the Brahman, the ultimate universal, and the snake is the illusion, the Maya, but that doesn't exist factually. So as soon as the curtain of Maya is removed, the jiva is uncovered from there, then it realizes that it is the same Brahman. So, but what Dvaitans say, but the experience of snake was real, that we experienced that reality, and if I experience the fear of a snake, that means snake exists somewhere. That means the Maya the energy of the illusory energy, that cannot be something that doesn't exist. I mean, it cannot be possible. That means both the rope and the snake, they exist independently. That's why I could mistook the rope to be a snake. So that's why both the snake and the rope both are true. So because I mistook the snake in my ignorance to be the rope, that's why I was bewildered and I was afraid. So, but factually, both of them exist. So how can I deny that there is no snake? So this is just analogy, just to compare the arguments from both parties. So, so just imagine that suppose this world is false. So then, what is the meaning to my words itself? So everything is false. My words are false. My expressions are false. My experiences are false. So all kind of scientific advancement. Why should I pursue? So because ultimately nothing exists. No meaning is left to that. So why it should exist? So so snake, so in that example, the snake really cannot be unreal because it produces factual effects. So the problem with Advaitin philosophy, there are many actually. So the two that I can point out is that the Maya, the root of all material shadows, just like all the transient experiences I have in this world. So if I trace back through the cause and effect, so the most fundamental material universal that I talk about, that is the Maya. That is in the Advaitin understanding, that is both real and unreal. That means that is something indescribable. But in our experience, in our sense perception, we don't have any object that is indescribable. Everything that we know, as soon as we know, means that is describable. So neither through our logic and reasoning that we figure out something that is indescribable. I mean, that is both real and unreal. And even in scriptures also, there is no mention of any instance of object that is both real and unreal. And then the most important question that this philosophy lacks to answer. So is that where is the Maya located? If everything is Brahman, for everything, there is no truth beyond Brahman. The thing in itself, just like Kant said, thing in itself is the only reality. So, so that is the Brahman in the Vedic understanding. So if that is the only truth, there is no variety, nothing. So no dual substance. So then how Maya is located? Where is Maya located? What is Maya? So where is the position of Maya? So that is something that this philosophy cannot answer. That's why there is a problem. So that to reconcile these things, so dualists, they really don't deny the existence of Brahman or the oneness of universals. So, but they talk about forms also. They talk about three features. That is, this is a quotation from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, second chapter, 11th verse, that says, learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So, so all the three attributes, they exist together, and so but this may appear contradictory. How can something having two different qualities? I mean, Brahman is something that is having without an attribute, and Bhagavan is something that has all attributes, all qualities, everything. So, but then it's our choice actually. We have two choices. So, if we accept Advaitin philosophy, then we will come to a position then where we reject the reality of this world, will reject all the varieties of this world. So, but instead, we'll say that this universal of Maya, that is indescribable. That is both real and unreal. But then, but that is not a very good stand. So the other stand, then the entity who actually deserves to be said as indescribable or achintya, that is the Supreme Lord, Supreme Absolute Truth. He can actually reconcile both Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan features. That's why this verse in Srimad Bhagavatam that says that although that absolute truth, that absolute universal is one and only, but it manifests itself in different features simultaneously. So it can be Brahman also, it can be Paramatma localized, just like the yogic traditions they pursue. localized aspects of absolute truth. And then Bhagavan with all forms, spiritual forms, all varieties, spiritual truth. So, so the understanding can be perfectly reconciled. The nature of Brahman and the nature of varieties. So they can be reconciled in the nature of absolute truth, because that is something who is worthy of all that statement. But instead, if we make that this world is indescribable and it is false, that is not a very solid understanding, and it's only makes us more ungrateful to whatever things that we have received in our life. So dualist, what do they say? They say the ultimate truth has all attributes, most perfect, universal. So we give all perfect qualities to that universal. And then what is Maya? Maya is the energy of that absolute. Because in dualist case there is no problem of accommodating multiple truths. And then how is that? That is only one reality. So it is because Maya is the energy of the absolute, and the energy and the energetic, they're connected. And again, as when I talk in terms of universals, they're just one universal. And when something is in relation with that attribute, I mean that universal, then it carries the reality. And when it is not, when that is not acknowledged, then that is Maya. So just like or so that means Maya is, or the energy of that universal, or the following the emanations, the subsequent universals that emanates from that grand universal or absolute truth. So they are all factuals. So the absolute truth, who is also called Krishna in the Vedic traditions, in Srimad Bhagavatam. So he is having a beautiful, wonderful form in the spiritual world with all kinds of spiritual variegatedness, and the bodily rays of him is called the Brahman, and and that's why the all contradictions that are reconciled with him. So then also, so how do I know about those absolute truth? So then that is our the Vedantic tradition, Vedanta Sutra, that talks in the first 1.1.3 Shastra Unitva. That means language may be insufficient to describe ultimate universal, but they are not completely incapable. So that means just like the Advaitin philosopher, they say that language is something bogus. The scriptures are something bogus. They just point, and after that they are meaningless. Just like in the last class also we discussed about Ludwig Wittgenstein was talking about in the similar line, when the reality behind the language is when it is learned, the language is to be thrown away. But why is that? So if there is some reality that language is talking about, so just by conceiving that there is some grain of truth, so I cannot really throw away thing. So, but my analogies may be insufficient. Just like I use metaphors and similes and all the analogies, different kinds of analogies that I use in scripture. So they may be trying to qualitatively describe, but and they encourage the practitioner to do some spiritual practice. And when somebody does that and has factual experience of the reality, then he experiences those descriptions. Just like Krishna has a beautiful form, Venum Konantam Aravinda Dalayatagsham, eyes are like lotus petal. The Krishna's eyes may not be like I mean, they're not like lotus. Lotus is the best thing that we have to describe that. That way, it is the limitation of the language, but that doesn't mean that there is no connection with the reality. There is some resemblance when in cast in terms of the shadow, the matter. So, so that's why. In the absolute truth, so there is no problem of reconciling opposite qualities. The absolute universal, it can perfectly reconcile the opposite attributes, opposite qualities. So hence, both oneness and difference of the absolute truth, that coexist. Oneness when things are in relation, acknowledged, and then when uh, the difference, because The subsequent emanations, they are also factual existences, and the realities of those cannot be really denied. So that is how both oneness and the difference are reconciled simultaneously. That's why it is called, the absolute truth is called achintya. Achintya means both difference and oneness are imposed on the object simultaneously at a time. So that's why it's called achintya. So this is something that I wanted to describe. So any of you have, it's all might have appeared very bizarre. So any of you have any questions, you can surely ask, and a few minutes we can discuss. Otherwise, we can end the meeting over here. Or if you have any notices that you want to show, bring Shubho or anybody else, so they can.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jyoti Ranjan. It's a wonderful, eye-opening seminar, a wonderful philosophical discussion. So I think the participants can directly ask questions. They can unmute themselves and ask the questions. Indrajit Prabhu, I think participants can unmute themselves.
Yes, they can do that.
Okay, wonderful.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes.
You talked about the Srimad Bhagavatam, and you said that transcendentalists conclude as Brahman, Bhagavan. Is Brahman and Bhagavan same, or why that kind of different approach? Transcendent, if Bhagavan is only one, the transcendentalist who obtained the self-realization should say only one. Why then the other term?
Yeah, actually, as you mentioned, that it's actually individual choice actually. At Srimad Bhagavatam talks about three stratum of absolute truth. It's not that Brahman is same as Paramatma or Paramatma is same as Bhagavan. So Bhagavan feature is the most perfect understanding. So Bhagavan feature also includes the Brahman. How the Krishna's bodily effulgence, that is the Brahman. So as Srimad Bhagavatam talks, so there is not really contradictions. So that's why if I go back to one of my previous slides, so they say it's one non-dual substance, but yet they are expressed as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And suppose a transcendentalist is more towards Advaita understanding, so he will end up in Brahman realization. And somebody who is after yogic perfection, and he may end up with Paramatma, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. So yet the highest level of understanding the Bhagavan, where actually the spiritual varieties, variegatedness manifested, and there are multiple jivas interacting with the Supreme, with the exchange of different mellows. So that is actually the most highest level of realization, and so it's up to the transcendental seeker where he wants to head to. But there is not really contradiction between Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. So they are features of the same object, same absolute truth. So did I answer?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Your name, Prabhu?
Kumar Prabhu.
Okay. So I think you came for the first time, perhaps.
Yeah, first time, yes.
Okay, thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
What you do, Haribol? आपने लिखा Haribol. I think you are connected with this call, huh? Already.
Yes.
कहाँ से जुड़े? क्या करते हैं आप?
I live in Moscow now.
Okay.
So I work here in Moscow, Russia.
What do you do in Russia?
In trading, export-import business.
Okay, right. Yeah. Great.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Okay, so any other question? Our regular audience, Ipsita, and last time Sham Sundari was also there. Shitender, you want to ask anything? Vignesh?
Actually, this discussion of this Advaita, particularly the Mayavad doctrine and the Vaishnava understanding, it's a very elaborate subject, and hours could be devoted to that. I just brushed up in few slides. So it's,
Yes, please. Ipsita, you wanted to say something?
I think they're not present for us.
Yeah, I think I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the question is like you said, whatever mind conceives will have some relation to some reality,
Reality, yeah.
right? Now the point is, suppose we give an exam. So but not everyone gets all the answers to all the questions right.
Yes.
So, but while writing the answers, the person would have written, I mean, they would have thought about something, whatever came to their mind.
Yes.
So what was, so, yeah, so the question is, the thing that came to their mind
Yes.
as an answer to the question,
Yes.
it was of course not right, but what relation did that have with some sort of reality? So yeah, so stated this way, it is just like it's like to say in a milder way, but the question is then what distinguishes actual reality from what is going on in my mind or brain?
Yes.
Right, I should be able to figure out for myself, okay, that whatever is coming in my mind, how much close is that to the truth? Of course, in an exam, the answers are well known, but here, yeah. So I hope I made myself somewhat clear about the question.
I understood your question. It's a quite difficult question to answer, but I will try. So,
Thanks.
so the point is, so as the scriptures say, that since God is eternal and the emanations are also, they carry the meaning, the reality. So how do we think actually? How do we perceive anything of this world? Just take the example of the person who is undergoing the exam, and suppose teacher asks, "What is the color of apple?" So the suppose the kid writes, "Apple is maroon," or "Apple is yellow," so something like that. So maybe that answer is not correct, but he actually imagined the apple as a concept, and he imagined yellow as a concept. So both these concepts, so they are not illusions. I mean, they exist in their factual identity. So I mean, there is something yellow that is real, and there is something. When I connect both those things, so since I don't see it's there in my world that I live in, but the nature, the point is that if it came to my mind, so my mind is a reality. So then how does it become? It's actually a philosophical question of more than objective answer. So it's a philosophical question that my mind could perceive of a reality. That means there is one thing is true, that the different parts of this reality, they are factual. The apple is factual, yellow is factual. But the connecting is, so that is the problem. So that is not realizable in my world, but but that doesn't prohibit the each to exist, the equivalence between these two pieces of reality to exist somewhere. So because
so I agree. Now the question is this: so a yellow apple, okay. So suppose we know, suppose it does not exist in our world, okay, on Earth, let's say. But does it? I mean, does our scripture say anything about this? That there will certainly be a place somewhere in this universe, or maybe another universe, the unlimited universes that there are, that there is a yellow apple. Maybe suppose our mind is so powerful that it can access realities well beyond what our universe is. So the question is, does whatever comes in my mind, does it really exist? I mean, yeah. So that's the question. Maybe not in this universe, but somewhere else. But it exists for sure.
So since mind is, as per Vedic tradition, mind is more fundamental than anything else in this world. the visual perceptions that I'm having. So a fundamental object can, even if it is not existing in this world, it is possible, at least theoretically, it is possible to manufacture that such a thing. How is that? So if you study the Sankhya, particularly the Bhagavad Sankhya, so there we see how different forms are formed. So, there is from the ignorance, mode of ignorance. So there, the production of sound in its subtlest form, and from there is the sky, basically the fabric of the universe. So then there is the further there is taste, odor, and all these different sense objects are produced, and ultimately the gross objects that we see, the earthly elements that we see in this world. So characterized with fragrance. So so the point is, so whatever you see in this world, they are combinations of all these different possibilities, and ultimately if you go back to the as a universal, so they all map to three modes of material nature: Satagun, Tamagun, and Rajagun. So the three attributes, and then again the Maya, or the energy of God. So a certain combination of objects made our world possible, made red apples possible. So factually, it's not impossible that somebody who can manipulate those subtle matters and fabricate a yellow apple. So just like the yogis, there are many kinds of siddhis they talk about, eightfold perfections they talk about. So that anything they can think of, they can manufacture. It's possible. So that in that sense, so that's why Vedic literature say that. So anything that we think of in our mind, so it's actually coming from a reservoir, the big reservoir of universals, and they combine together through the action of time, through the activating agent, and the material nature, the prakriti, the super soul, and different agents are there. We'll talk more in our Bhagavad Gita in a more transparent way, and the way Bhagavad talks. So since these are different pieces of realities brought together in a natural way, the way Krishna wanted this world to be. But the other possibilities can be cooked up by a yogi who knows how to manipulate the subtle matter. So that way, it's not an impossible thing. So, so
Okay, so, yeah. So I think I got that. Even if there are, it is possible that someone can, using their siddhis, construct a thing which apparently is impossible in our world. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Now, yeah. So now I'll ask one final question. So many times in my dream, suppose I get a very scary dream in which I see one of my friend, and I see that they passed away. Okay, they left their body.
Yes.
Okay, but in the morning, I'm like, I just got up, and in the dream it was like super real, like it really happened that they passed away. Okay.
Yeah, this is a strange nature of perception that we have.
Yeah. Now in the morning, when I get up, okay, let me call or confirm. Okay. When I call, and if I want myself to be wrong, okay, whatever I had. So the question here now is, once I get to know that nothing has happened to my friend,
yes,
right? So I know that whatever I saw in the dream was not correct.
Correct.
Okay. So what can you say about this? What was my mind doing in the dream? Yeah,
so,
this is my
this is a very interesting topic. I'm very much interested in this understanding of perception. So basically, what mind does. So for a person like us, who is having many kinds of imperfections stored in our chitta, I mean, basically the subtle mind, subtle body. So many kind of impressions, they cook up and present a reality, but that reality is currently present as a blueprint. That is not realized as a factual I mean, again, the question of what is factual, that is again another question. But assuming that I equate for the moment that I can perceive in this world through my senses, that is factual. So that blueprint is not yet realized in this world, in the world I live in. But it certainly exists as a subtle universal in my mind, cooked up by my mind based on my impressions. And those who are very elevated, so for them it's not a source. The ignorance is not the source of their dream. So they're as conscious as they're in their awakened stage. So the realities they perceive is true. So just like in our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, there are many sages who actually do manasi seva kind of. I mean, they in their mind they cook up some service to the Supreme Lord, maybe offering to the Lord, or fanning him, or something, making an item for him. Although those realities in blueprint, they don't exist outside, they're not yet realized, but since they are so pure, so actually the absolute truth, the Supreme Lord Krishna, he accepts that offering. So because if it were not factual, why Krishna would accept that offering? And those information is mentioned in the life, the biography of our acharyas. Of course, if you don't accept, you don't trust those things, so that's a different thing. But so if you accept that everything answers, but then coming to more more detailed manner, so basically so the universals, the subtle actually creates the gross object. So I think you accept that subtle creates the gross. The blueprint, first I have the blueprint, then the gross manifestations. So so when I think somebody, some near dear is dying in my dream, so that blueprint may not be compatible with the cause and effect relations that I have already set up in the gross world, in the gross experience. That may be possible in the level of universals, where the cause and effect relations are they exist in a more fundamental sense than it exists in the more tighter way in the physical gross world. So there it may be realizable, and it may not be grossly possible to visualize that. And in fact, to my surprise, in 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, so where Narada Muni is talking to Puranjan, so about the story of Puranjan to Maharaj Prachin Varishad. So there he says that the devotees of the Lord, so they get the reactions in the dreams. So what does it mean? So that's interesting. So that it's like if all kind of reactions that we experience in this world, the reality that we experience, they are all product of originated by our karma. So the past activities, and then again fueled by present activities, the whole complicated cause and effect cycles, that gives a result that we see as some result in this world. And then, so what he says that Narada Muni says that for a devotee who is trying to advance in spiritual life, so for him, so that cause and effect relation is not necessarily to be realized as gross manifestations. It can be realized in subtle mind as well. And those reactions that was otherwise to come as gross manifestations, that that ends the cause effect cycle in the subtle mind itself. So that way it answers perhaps. So in some sense, but certainly these are very detailed and complicated things. I acknowledge my incapability in perfectly describing, but certainly there are some feelings that I have that I shared with you. So does that answer your question to some extent?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, it's not very concrete in the sense of okay, so let me frame it like this. So the point is, suppose someone is becoming spiritually advanced, okay? Now the point is, when will they themselves come to know
Hmm.
that what is happening in their mind,
Yes.
whether they have reached a certain level
Hmm.
that whatever is happening in their mind is actually
The truth.
real, truth.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
is so again, if I go back to the answer I gave last time, so Sabda Pramana that operates on the level of perfect level of Sabda, the Para level of Sabda. So Sabda exists in 4 stages: Para, Pashyanti, Madhyama, and Vaikhari. So the Para level of information, Sabda. So there the elements of that Sabda and the reality they talk about, they're not different. So the people who are at that level, so the reality that they think of, it is realized actually. It exists. It factually it is there. So that is the nature of parasound. And how do they know? How can somebody say that? Of course, somebody may cheat to himself and others. Uh, if there is any trace of confusion in that, that means it's not on that level. He's not on the factual spiritual level. And
Yeah, exactly. So the kind of dream that I'm talking about is where you really felt that from the core of your heart, you felt that, okay, that happened, and you are already crying, etc., in your dream. Okay,
so,
so
so
I mean, out of thousands of dreams, 1 or 2 are like that. Okay,
So
so
actually, there are. Yeah, please complete your question first. Yeah.
yeah. So now, as I understand from you, so that is like para experience for that person, where he.
No. These are not para. So these understandings, a person who like suppose I dreamt about something that is too much factual, that may not be para level. That's not para actually. Para is a spiritual level, and what I am operating is more on Madhyama and Pashyanti and Vaikhari level. That's not para. So all our experiences are emergence of our ignorance. The different pieces of reality, they are not properly connected to the absolute truth. That way, it is ignorance, and they cook up and manufacture something to us. So as a blueprint. So that is a different understanding. So actually, Vedic literature talks about 4 levels of awareness. So this is one level of awareness that you're talking. It's called Swapna. So Jagrati is the level we are grossly aware of the world around us, and Swapna is the level that you are talking about. And then there is yet another level that is called Susupti. Susupti means dreamless sleep. There is no dream, no perfectly attributeless. That is even sometimes the Advaita philosophers, they to describe what is Brahman, they say that it's just like um, a dreamless sleep. So then, yet that is not the final story. So the 4th level of existence a person can have. So that is the basically the Turiya stage, the transcendental or the para level of existence. So that is different.
Yeah. So what I was trying to devise a
I think
method by which.
I would just like to interrupt here
Yeah, please.
because your discussion is going on for a last half an hour.
Yeah.
If other participants they want to ask anything,
Yeah, we can
first I
participate.
would like to give them the chance first,
Yes,
and then Sitendra and Jyoti Ranjan, you can talk all night, no problem.
yeah, we'll be in touch with you.
Okay. So if anybody of you want to ask anything,
Vijay, I have a question.
Yes, please.
yes.
See, you discussed about Advaita and Dvaita philosophy.
Mhm.
In that, you gave a very good analogy on rope and snake.
Yes.
And then you concluded that both are right from their own perspective.
Both are right. No, that's not the conclusion.
No, okay. My conclusion. Both are correct from the perspective that, yes, definitely, when he stamped, he felt it is a snake and he ran into the room. There's no doubt in this. So, when next day morning, when he says, yes, there was a rope, but definitely the feeling was there for him also. You said that the other dualists had a feeling, experience, but whereas they did not. But I feel both are right from their own perspective. They are correct. So how can dualists say Advaita specialists are not correct?
Yeah. So
That is my question.
Yeah.
How can you really say Advaita philosophy is wrong?
No, so the point is not Advaita philosophy is wrong. So the problem with Advaita philosophy, when it casts in terms of the variant called Mayavad, so there the problem is with the understanding of Maya. So Dvaitas, they don't have problem with Brahman, understanding of Brahman. They agree. But what they don't agree is with the understanding of Maya. So in this example, so Advait philosopher, particularly the followers of Mayavad, so why they are called Mayavad? Because their understanding of Maya is something that Vaishnavas do not accept. So the Maya, they say, just like here, Maya is something that is not factually existing practically. And since there is just one variety, Brahman, and Brahman is equivalent to the rope here. And the imposition of snake is called Maya in their terms. So just like the next day when light was there and all of a sudden everything was clear. So that's why the Advaita philosophers, the Mayavadi philosophers, they say that as soon as the curtain of Maya is removed, basically the darkness is removed from the jiva, so it at once realizes himself to be the Brahman, basically the rope. So what it means actually, so they say that a snake, which is likened to be the Maya, that is not factual. But so here actually the Dvaitas don't agree. They say it's okay that the rope is the factual substance that was there before and you mistook, and that is Brahman, no problem, we accept. But the understanding of Maya that you are saying, that it is not factual and it is illusion. But how can that be? The snake, I could mistook a rope to be snake just because the snake has its own identity, rope has its own factual identity. So unless and until I have factual experience of the snake sometime before, I'll not really be afraid of the rope. Just like a child who is going to burn his finger in the fire. So first time he goes, he's not afraid of the fire. So when he puts his finger inside the fire, so he at once becomes afraid. So so basically, unless and until I have factual experience of something, I'm not going to be afraid of that. So there actually Dvaita philosophers say, so this Maya, what you are seeing is not factual, and Brahman is the only thing that exists without attributes. So that is not so tenable. So what is a better understanding could be Brahman is there, but Brahman can also exist with full of attributes. That is the Bhagavan level of understanding, Bhagavan feature. And there all kinds of qualities, everything is there, all contradictory, all kinds of qualities. Both, suppose A is a quality and not A is a quality. So both can coexist in the understanding of the absolute truth, the Bhagavan. So there is no problem in that. So there actually Dvaitas and Advaitas don't agree on the understanding of Maya. For Dvaitas, Maya is a factual, the energy of absolute. And when there is change, why there is variety in this world? Because there is change in this Sakti. That's why it's called Sakti Parinam. I didn't have time to discuss all these things in detail. So this is called Sakti Parinam Bad. There is transformation in the energy, not in the universal blueprint or universal absolute truth, the absolute truth, basically, Bhagavan. There is no change in that. He is unchanging, but the Sakti changes. Because Sakti exists. Why? Because it is existing in relation with the Shaktiman, the absolute truth. That's why both are real. How can something unreal emanate from a real? Like all content of a reality is real. Something that comes from the real, how it can be unreal? So it actually violates the cause and effect understanding itself also. So that's why, sorry, I'm going too detailed into abstract description. So to make short the answer, so Dvaitas don't agree on the understanding of Maya. So that is where Dvaitas and the Mayavadis differ.
So for the Advaitas, there is no Maya, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, for the Advaitas, Maya is so then when you ask them just to answer why there is variety, factual variety that I'm experiencing, what about the experience? why there is no grain of truth in that? So they say actually Maya is something that is we really don't know. It is real also. It is not unreal also. Like the popular version is Brahman Satya Jagan Mithya, but more concrete Advaita understanding is Maya is both factual and not factual. So that means they are saying that Brahman is describable. Describable in the sense Brahman is the only reality. Maya is something that we don't understand, and that is indescribable. In the language of Adi Shankaracharya, it is anirvachaniya. But who is worthy of receiving that attribute? So the absolute truth, who is having all kinds of features, so he is worthy of being achintya, not the Maya, the energy. So if the Maya is achintya, the Maya is indescribable, so then why at all I'm talking about all these things, and how Maya overpowers Brahman to form varieties of this world? How is that possible? That means Maya is more powerful than Brahman. So that is where basically the understanding of Maya is somewhere the energy, because Advaitans don't accept the factuality of the factual existence of Maya, the energy of God, because they don't have any attribute. Brahman has no attribute. So that is where difference comes.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Any other questions?
I think the participants, so you have all these philosophical questions. So if you read directly the Bhagavad Gita as it is,
Yeah, I think
all these doubts will, I'm specifically saying as it is, Bhagavad Gita, which is the commentary given by the greatest Vaishnava scholar, the founder Acharya of ISKCON, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, then all these doubts will get clear even before starting the Bhagavad Gita. There's a 40-page introduction of Bhagavad Gita, and most of the doubts are cleared there only. And then when you read the authorized commentary, the commentary and the Srila Prabhupada's commentary on Bhagavad Gita is basically based on the commentary given by the various, the great acharyas in the Vaishnava line, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, and other great acharyas, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Ji Goswamis. So if you read Prabhupada books directly, so basically, automatically, all these confusions go away. So my request would be, because we have a limited time, and
whatever I'm saying is all from reading Srila Prabhupada's.
Yes, of course. So like Sitendra and Haribol Prabhu and all. So आप लोग जो है प्रभुपाद जी का जो बुक्स हैं सारी अवेलेबल हैं, and you can even download the PDF copy, or wherever you are living, you go to the nearby ISKCON temple and get the copy of Bhagavad Gita and start reading verse by verse. So definitely जो है, all these questions, these are all important questions, they're very, very important questions, because once these are cleared, then the path of spiritual practices and spiritual life and spiritual realization gets cleared. So these are very basic, important questions. So, and acharyas have deliberated on these for years and hundreds of years. These questions are being deliberated, and there are very specific answers to all of these questions. All great scholars have deliberated on these, and they have given their realization, and their answers are based on realizations, not only just scholarly articles and all. Like we are discussing, our realization is not that strong, है ना? जो आचार्यस जो commentary लिखते हैं, they are factually seeing that reality and then they are writing. So we don't have that experience. So once we read directly from them, so and they helped by the various discussions within this devotee community, ISS community, so things will get clear really nicely. So can we close now?
Yeah, I think today is also the appearance day of the incarnation of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he is the one who gave this Achintya Veda Ved. This philosophy that I am talking about is called Achintya Veda Ved, because both Ved and Aved, they are reconciled together. and he is the one who propounded this philosophy through his disciples.
Yeah, so that is a good tribute to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu today by your lecture.
I just tried.
So, yeah. Okay.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Krishna. Thank